Well, good morning, friends. I hope you're having a fantastic day so far. Now, as you can see, usually my face is on your whole screen, but now I'm just in the corner. We've been going through the whole book of Matthew for most of this year, and I've really enjoyed it. And we are now getting to what's called the pointy end. We're almost finished. Things are starting to heat up in this dramatic story. Now, today we're going to be looking at chapter 24 and 25 of the book of Matthew. Now, for your information, there's about 28 chapters, so we're almost finished. But in today's devotion, or in today's, I guess, Bible lesson, it's pretty tricky. And I had no idea how I'm going to bring these chapters into a really good devotion. So I hope I'm going to do a good job today, but it's pretty tricky and there's a lot to cover. So I want to take a really big idea and bring it in as narrow as possible, just so we can all understand. But this devotion is called The End. He will return. So I want you to take a moment to think. Have you ever watched an end of world movie? Sometimes they're called an apocalyptic movie. Now, some of you might be a little bit maybe young, but these are some of the movies that have come out over the past few years. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of apocalyptic or end of world movies. So what we've got on the screen here is a movie at the top left called 2012. This one came out in 2011 or about 2012, and basically the whole world was going to end. All the oceans were going to rise up. There was going to be massive earthquakes. A lot of people were going to pass away. Other movies are like Independence Day, when the world ends, or Saint Andreas, when there's huge earthquakes and a lot of people try to flee. It's the end of the world. And one of my favorites is a movie called I Am Legend, and it's about like this plague going throughout the whole earth and people don't survive, but there's only one survivor. Sounds a little bit like Corona. It's not like Corona, but it's kind of that idea, isn't it? That sometimes in movies, we kind of know that there's going to be an end of world. Maybe you've heard of a thing called climate change and people predicting that the world might end. There's another movie down the bottom there called Mad Max. Now, I love Mad Max. And that's sort of like post-apocalyptic, which is like the end of the world's already happened and there's still people living. Look, these things are kind of all fanciful movies. They're not really based on anything true, but I think it goes to show that people understand that the world isn't going to be around forever. There's going to be an end of the world. But this is the important thing that I'm wanting to share with you today. That in Matthew 24 and 25, Jesus talks about the end of the world. Now, I think it's okay that the Bible has an end of the world because the Bible had a beginning of the world. Remember from Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then the Bible kind of ends with not the destruction of the world, but a renewal, a new earth. God's going to make everything better. And that is what Jesus came to do. Jesus came to make the world better and to save us all. But before he does that, the world needs to go through some challenging times. Now, that's a bit scary. That scares me. It might even scare you. But here you can see some pictures about the end times. Pretty weird, pretty spooky. Now, usually, as you know, I like to bring in another video that kind of helps us all understand these big ideas. Now, I'm not going to read any Bible today because I don't actually know where to start because it's two big full chapters and I don't want to bore you this early in the morning. But maybe I could just try summarize things. But you know what? I'm going to do that after this video. Now, this video is from the Bible Project. If you've been watching some of my devotions, you would know that we've been watching some of these guys. Now, some of the words in this video that we're going to watch very soon, they're kind of not big, but they're kind of hard to understand, even for me. So try your best to listen. But even if there's some things that go over your head, maybe you just go, Mr. Bear, I don't understand this. that's okay. Maybe you can just enjoy the animation and the drawings of it. You know, that's what I like sometimes when I don't completely understand the information. Because once again, these things are a little bit tricky to understand. But you know what? Let's take a few minutes and let's watch this video on the end times, which is also called the Day of the Lord. Let's go.
The Day of the Lord. It's a phrase in the Bible that religious people use, usually when talking about the end of the world.
Yeah, things like Armageddon or the apocalypse. You might be familiar with this image of Jesus returning on a white horse. He's got a sword to bring final judgment.
And everyone wants to know, how will it all go down?
So a lot of these images come from the last book of the Bible, but to understand them, you have to go back to the first book.
When the story begins, we watch God create an amazing world, and then he gives humans power to rule over it on his behalf.
But the humans are tempted by this mysterious, unhuman character who offers them a promise. You could define good and evil on your own terms and put yourselves in God's place.
Which is what they do. And the resulting stories are about the broken relationships and violence that results.
Yeah, this promise creates huge problems. Now everyone has to protect themselves and fight for survival, and they're all using death as this weapon to gain power.
It all leads to a story about the building of the city of Babylon.
Or in Hebrew, Bavel. Everyone comes together to elevate themselves to the place of God. And God knows how devastating this could be. A whole culture redefining good and evil as if they are God.
So God confuses their language and scatters them.
Now from here on, Babylon becomes like an icon in the biblical story. It's an image that represents humanity's corporate rebellion against God.
And the next time we see it is in the story of ancient Egypt.
Yeah, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, he feels threatened by these immigrant Israelites. He starts killing all of the boys, enslaving the rest.
And this is really evil.
Yeah, Egypt's like this bigger, badder Babylon. They take care of themselves at the expense of others by redefining evil as good. And so God turns Pharaoh's evil back on him. His pride drives him forward, and he's swallowed up by death.
Now, after this great deliverance, the Israelites sing a song about how God is their warrior who liberated them from evil.
And the Israelites referred to this moment as the day.
The day they were rescued from a corrupt human system.
And every year since then, the Israelites have celebrated the day of their liberation with this symbolic meal of a sacrificial lamb. It's called Passover.
Eventually, Israel comes into its own land, have their own kings, and they face new enemies.
So that past Day of the Lord, celebrated every Passover, begins to generate hope that God will bring the day again to save Israel from new threats.
Now, out in the hills was a sheep herder named Amos.
He was appointed by God as a prophet to announce shocking news to Israel, that God was bringing another day of the Lord against his enemies, and this time the target is Israel.
What?
Sadly, Israel's leaders had also redefined good and evil for themselves, resulting in corruption and violence.
So God's people have become like Babylon, the oppressed become oppressors. Babylon seems like a trap no one can escape.
And so the day of the Lord comes upon Israel. They're conquered, taken captive into exile, and from then on, Israel suffered under the rule of continuous oppressive empires.
This is the story Jesus was born into.
Yeah, in his day, the oppressive empire over Israel is Rome.
So, is Jesus gonna confront Rome, take him out?
Well, no. Jesus saw the real enemy as that mysterious, unhuman evil. The evil that's lured Babylon, Egypt, Rome, Israel. All humanity has given in to evil's promise of power. This is what Jesus resisted alone in the wilderness when he was tempted to exploit his power for self-interest.
But he didn't. And after that, he started to confront the effects of evil on others.
Yeah, he started saying that he was going to Jerusalem for Passover for a final showdown to confront the evil of Israel and Rome by dying.
Dying? I mean, that feels like losing.
Jesus was going to let evil exhaust all of its power on him, using its only real weapon, death. Jesus knew that God's love and life were even more powerful, that he could overcome evil by becoming the Passover lamb, giving his life in an act of love. And something changed that day. When Jesus defeated evil, he opened up a new way for anyone to escape from Babylon and discover this new kind of power, this new way of being human.
Okay, so something changed. But the power of evil is still alive and well, and we keep building new versions of Babylon.
Right. And so the last book of the Bible, the Revelation, points to the future and final day of the Lord. It's when God's kingdom comes to confront Babylon the Great, this image of all the corrupt nations of the world.
Yeah, this is it. Armageddon, final judgment. How is Jesus gonna finish off evil?
Well, that's not how you'd expect. In the Revelation, the victorious Jesus is symbolized by a sacrificial bloody lamb. And then when Jesus does arrive in the end, riding his white horse to confront evil, he's bloody before the battle even starts.
Pre-bloodied? That's a strange image.
Yeah, it's because Jesus isn't out for our blood. Rather, he overcame with his blood when he died for his enemies. And the sword is in his mouth. It's a symbol of Jesus' authority to define good and evil and hold us accountable when he brings final justice once and for all.
And so, in the meantime, the day of the Lord is an invitation to resist the culture of Babylon.
And it's a promise that God will one day free our world from corruption and bring about the new things that he has in store.
Well, thank you so much, girls and boys, for taking the time to watch that video with me. You know, I know there were some pretty big ideas in that. So if some things just went over your head and you go, I got no idea what we just watched, that's okay too. But because we're going through the whole book of Matthew, I think it's important that we incorporate what Jesus is actually talking about. So I'm going to do my best to summarize what we've just listened to. So number one is this. God created all the heavens and the earth good. Very good. But through Satan and sin, destruction and death came into the world. So number two, God didn't leave it that way. He came to save us and redeem us from the darkness that Satan and his angels brought. And he actually made this victory through Jesus dying on the cross for us. But number three, there needs to be an end of the world because there's still so much darkness in the world and Jesus needs to judge it. He needs to save us all by getting rid of all the darkness that still pervades our culture. Now, these times will be challenging times in the end days. You know, maybe if you're interested in what it looks like, maybe you can read Matthew chapter 24 or chapter 25, or you can come up and ask me and I can try my very best to tell you. But number four, now we don't usually have 4 points in our devotions, but number four is this, and this is the most important part. No matter what happens in the end times, Jesus wins, and the people that know him and love him, they win too. So I think that's pretty special. Once again, really big themes in this morning's devotion. If some things sort of went over your head, that's okay, because in the next few chapters, we're going to be finishing the book of Matthew, and it's all going to come together. It's like one big story that's all going to come together at the end. So if you would like to look into these things more, maybe ask your teacher, or you can come up and ask me. That's fine. Anyway, big devotion. Whew, glad we're done that one. See you around.